And hello, everybody. What a wonderful turnout. Thank you so much for taking up your lunch break and spending it with 1 million women today. We really appreciate it. And this is such an important discussion. And thank you, Rosie and Michael, for being our guests today. Eddie has broken his finger and he was at the specialist at 9 o'clock this morning, but unfortunately he is still there. So we're not sure if Eddie's going to jump on or not, but we have Michael and Rosie. And I am Natalie Isaacs. I am the founder of 1 Million Women, and I'd like to acknowledge, the land that I am talking to you all from today. I'm on Darrell country. I'm sandwiched between the escarpment and the beautiful Pacific Ocean. And it's really, oh gosh, you've got me on profile, so I can only see myself now. So anyway, yes, so and on this beautiful land, and I have just come back from paddling around the Great Barrier Reef with some other 1 Million Women folk as a fundraiser for 1 Million Women, and the love of this earth is so important. And what we're talking about today with demystifying clean energy is a really important topic for us. So I'm not going to say too much, but I did want to say that I'm not sure if some of you or all of you saw the message that we sent out early last week, where we have a new CEO at 1 Million Women, and it's a really beautiful new chapter for us. I have been the founder CEO for 17 years, and we are doing such important work. And I am so excited to have Paola Brody, our new CEO, join the team. And I'm not going anywhere. It gives me a lot more time to be out there in the 1 Million Women community, which you all know is where I love being most. So I cannot wait to meet some of you with the regional and rural and remote work that we are doing with women across the country. So thank you all so much for always supporting us. We're a tiny team and we do huge work, and I'm really proud of where we've come, what we've done over the years and what we've achieved. So that is all I'm going to say this morning, and I'm going to hand it over to Paola, our wonderful, amazing new CEO, to introduce the work that we're doing. Over to you, Paola.
Thanks, Nat. Hi, everyone. I am also super excited to join the team at 1 Million Women. We've got lots of ideas and plans that we're pulling together for the future, lots of chats and lots of work, really important work to be doing. At the moment, this year, we're delivering a program called She Powers, which is about bringing regional and rural women together to connect, to share, to learn, because we know that women in communities have such a really, really key and important role of being trusted messengers when it comes to change, and particularly change around energy transition. We're about we know about the importance of sharing lived experiences, coming together to share solutions, and how creating connections, really builds confidence and can be really empowering to be with people, especially for people who are outside of cities where you're with people all the time. In the regions and remote communities, it can be a bit more disparate. So we're just bringing together a beautiful group of women who have spent some time together already. We are looking to the future in the next couple of months, where our She Powers network coming together to organise gatherings in communities where they are small gatherings, intimate gatherings, but allow free discussion and exploration on what an energy transition and energy security looks like for communities, and how communities can benefit and prosper through this by having those discussions and envisaging what the future looks like really allows for concrete pathways to change. So from those gatherings in August, we're going to pull together lots of insights, and not just insights about what's benefits and opportunities, but also, associated challenges and risks. And there's a lot of those, and we need to address those for success in this space. Um, we'll pull together the insights, and then we'll be able to use that information within communities, giving it as a tool for people, and then also for advocacy within different levels of governments. So we've got a really busy period in the next few months, pulling this work together and sort of helping all of this happen. We'll share some more information on the gatherings and what we're doing in the near future, in the next couple of weeks, so that we can all start planning to do these things. But yeah, there's lots going on. We're super excited, but we're really conscious of how important it is to have trusted local voices in communities speaking up, and being open to discussion around some really big, important changes for Australia. So there's a lot there. And to get stuck into today, I'm going to hand back to Bree, who's going to host the session. Or hand over to Bree, even.
Hello,
Thanks, Bree.
everybody. Give me 2 seconds just to add Rosie and Michael. Yeah, thank you so much for joining this session. And with a lot of our work, it does start with the education piece first, and then trying to empower and build. And so that's what we're doing here today. We're learning all about clean energy and really trying to just, pick the brains of some incredible people that have taken the time to join us, because I know you've got years and years of experience in this sort of field. And so we're really grateful to have Michael and Rosie here to answer as many questions. So the way it's going to roll, you can either put your hand up, like the little sort of Zoom react, and say your question aloud. Or if you don't want to talk, you can just pop it in the chat, and we can ask Michael and Rosie your questions as well. So yeah, we'll be monitoring the chat, and just as many questions as you have put there. And if we don't get to all of them, we can figure out a way to answer your questions via email as well. So to start off with, I just want to introduce Rosie and Michael. So Rosie has been making videos about renewable energy and engineering and other clean technologies for years and years. She's so well such a good, clear communicator. And I know I've found a lot of her videos very helpful to unpack these really dense sort of topics. So I'm very excited that we could have you here today. And she's got over 20 years of experience with engineering and in the new clean energy industry. And so she is here to, provide all that expertise. And then we've got the wonderful Michael Katz, who is CEO of RELA, and has been in the space of the rollout of renewable energy, and bringing land into the center of that as well. And so he's been, and again, another 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, academic, football player, and has really focused his efforts in the last many years on really bringing a plan for land into the center of how we shift to renewables. So thank you both so much for jumping on board. And yeah, my apologies to Eddie, who can't make it, but he's also another incredible mind who's been working in this space and very well knowledgeable about policy and all of this. But I guess first, a question for both of you. Just wanted to start off with your take on why we need to shift to clean energy. Now, maybe start with Michael.
Thanks, Brianna, and thanks everyone for inviting me on. A little bit nervous with the title of 1 million women. I've spent my life with mixed success in not getting in trouble with one woman, so 1 million is a big challenge. But yeah, it was great to hear your introduction, Natalie, and the enthusiasm with which you founded and run it. It's great to see, inspiring to see that. I think it's what we all aspire to is to genuinely have a mission, and that's certainly something that we've brought into RELA. I think, Bree, in terms of answering that question, why the transition to clean energy, look, to a large degree, we at RELA avoid taking policy positions. We don't necessarily say this is what we think the country should go to. This is the direction the country should go to. Personally, I think that clean energy is the right way, because I think it gives Australia the chance to really harness the natural assets that we've got, the wind and the sun and the space. And in doing so, we can really move towards not just sustainable, but towards from an environmental point of view, but to an energy security point of view, which we've seen the importance of that recently, of energy sovereignty. What I think, when we approach this energy transition, really what we come at it from the frame is also a land transition. There's a fundamental shift in land use that's accompanying the fundamental shift in energy generation. So that's the way that we come at it, is given the policy settings that we've got, rather than necessarily supporting or not supporting it, which, as I said, on a personal level, I do. And I think it's really about energy sovereignty and maximizing the assets, the natural assets we've got. But fundamentally, when we look at energy transition, we come at it from the lens of land transition, and that opens up a whole different set of considerations and objectives than just the energy side of the equation.
Thanks.
Do you-
And Rosie?
The same question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would answer it two different ways, because like the way that I would have answered it when I chose to start working in renewable energy is really different to the way that I deal with it day to day now. So originally it was just, when I was at uni, just out of uni, I just became very concerned about climate change, and specifically the effect that it was having on biodiversity. Like it just like really upsets me to be part of the species, but also part of a couple of generations that are really just annihilating a whole lot of the beauty on Earth. It's such an amazing Earth, and I honestly just feel really sick about what we've done to it. And so I'm an engineer, which is really fortunate that the skills that I have are actually good skills that can contribute to solving that problem. And I feel a lot more peace within myself knowing that I'm working hard to address that. But that said, like early on in my career, like solar was not like even a thing when I started. I started working, my first renewable energy job was for a solar, like it's a startup solar company on a weird kind of solar that never really went anywhere. But regular solar, like the kind of panels you have on your roof, were not a thing. They existed. No one expected them to ever be something that someone would do just because that was like a cheap way to make electricity. It was all about, like at that time, was all about how can we convince people that they need to pay money, that they need to hurt economically in order to save the planet because it's so important. And it was just such slow progress as to be basically non-existent progress. And in my career, at one point, I made the decision to leave Australia. It was at the time of Tony Abbott. So I was kind of, really frustrated with the progress here. But I went to Europe. I wanted to work in wind energy because at that time, that was the one that was closest to being, just economically viable in its own right. And I could see that nothing was ever going to happen fast until it wasn't just that proportion of the population that like passionately cares about the environment that wanted to push this. So yeah, I just really wanted to contribute to making renewable energy cheaper than fossil fuels. So I moved to Denmark and worked for a wind turbine manufacturer. And when I was working there were people working for that company who did not believe in climate change. And it didn't matter because it was just a good way to make electricity, regardless of what your beliefs were. And I think like ever since then, that was like 2016, I moved there. Since about that period, it has gone really mainstream. It's not like there are no challenges left. There's heaps of challenges left, but like the bulk of it, for electricity generation and storage and vehicles, it's a huge chunk of emissions. The electric technologies, renewable technologies are actually just better and cheaper, and it gives us a momentum where now I feel like things can really happen. So now I wouldn't say like, why do we have to move to renewable energy? It's more like, why is it inevitable? We need to you always have to keep on upgrading and maintaining your energy system. If we don't do renewables now, then at some point in the next 10, 15 years, we'll have to be building new coal power plants or something like that, which don't make any economic sense at all. So, it's going to be government support for one or the other, or we have an electricity system that fails. So, yeah, I think it's the wrong framing now to say, oh, why should we go through this pain to get renewables? It's like, like this is just the pain of having a functioning electricity system over decades. And renewables is the most sensible way to do it now.
Yeah, that kind of leads into one of the questions that we get quite often around kind of grid stability. And so I would love to ask, I guess, what do you think needs to happen for our moving forward for our electricity grid to remain stable as our coal plants are closing?
Is that a question for me? Or
Yeah.
yeah, I'll start anyway. So there's so many engineers that are just purely devoted to making sure that our electricity grid stays stable, and they have been before the energy transition, and their job is different now, but their goal is the same, to keep it stable. I think that what people don't realize is that it was never easy or straightforward to get our electricity grid, especially in Australia, to be stable. We're a really spread out population. Our transmission is all long and skinny. There's towns like Broken Hill, which are hundreds of kilometers of just one single transmission line reaching them. It was never easy to keep that grid stable. So in a way, Australia is really well positioned to then move to this next level of complexity, because we've already got engineers who are used to thinking about really complex power systems. So anyway, some of the concrete things that they're thinking of, the big challenge that most people raise, there's a couple, I guess. First of all, electricity, it needs to be delivered when you need it, where you need it. And that was also something that we had to solve for fossil fuels. It's not like everybody lived right next to a coal power plant and plugged their TV directly into the generator. We still needed to build transmission. We still needed to match the time that electricity was generated with the time people wanted to use it. We have off-peak hot water here was one of the things that we did to try and make our usage more closely match what a fossil fuel power plant wanted to give. So it's similar challenges, but different now, obviously. Wind farms need to be located where it's windy, and that's different to where the coal power plants were. And so there's new transmission. So, that's one challenge. Then there's energy storage is, more necessary with variable renewables. Obviously, the sun sets every day. It's not always windy. Batteries have done a really good job, especially recently in Australia, of really solving the vast majority of solar's problem. The sun setting every day problem is very close to taken care of with batteries now. The prices of electricity in the evening peaks have just dramatically fallen in the last year since we had so many more batteries on the grid, including in people's homes. And the default electricity offer has actually decreased for the first time in ages across most states, or it will in July. So, that's a sign of really good progress. But then the other thing, like, I don't know how technical people are here, but the other big thing about like coal power plants or gas is that they're big and heavy, and they provide inertia in the system. So it's just like actually very physically hard to stop them turning. And so they provide a lot of stability in terms of the voltage and the frequency of the electricity grid. And that's something that you have to do synthetically when you don't have those in the system anymore. There's a couple of different solutions to that. One is synchronous condensers, which basically it's still like a big rotating mass, but you just power it with electricity instead of with coal or gas. That's kind of the old school way of doing it, I would say. We have a few of those. They're a little bit expensive, but not in the scheme of, a whole electricity grid cost of maintenance. But then the newer thing is getting batteries to do that job, grid forming inverters. So they will, when they receive the signal that something has disturbed the electricity grid, they will act as if they are a big thermal generator and provide that signal needed into the grid to keep it stable. So yeah, that's basically the two things. I hope I didn't go too geeky there, but yeah.
No, that's great. And Michael, my next question is around, I guess, your discussion with landholders and farmers. What are you hearing as sort of the biggest challenges that people are having out in communities?
I think it stems from, if you look back at the other question about the grid stability, that sort of same philosophy goes then into projects, and the main problem is stemming from the fact that historically these challenges have been looked at from the perspective of moving electrons through a grid, and that's obviously an incredibly important perspective. But the story of the landholder, the puzzle on the agricultural production system is essentially ignored. It's just not a consideration in thinking about the energy plans, and that's the thing we hear from landowners time and again is the developer came in and basically saw a blank sheet. My 15,000 hectares in their minds was a blank sheet, and I must confess that as a city boy, that's how I would see 15,000 hectares as well. But if I'm going in to develop infrastructure on that land, I need to understand the story of that land before I can insert a new story. And so what we see is a developer coming in with a vision for an energy plant, and we see a landholder who has the story of the existing agricultural production system on that land, and the two stories really don't translate to connect with one another. The landholder often has that information in their head, but is unable to communicate it or articulate it or present it in a way that the developer can then actually consider and implement into their thinking. And that leads to fundamental miscommunication, lack of knowledge across the two different perspectives. And over time, that misalignment bubbles up into disputes or challenges around layouts, around decision making, around programs, and that really, as far as we see it, is the fundamental challenge. Is you have two very different perspectives operating on the same land without a way to clearly communicate with one another. And what we think is a response to that is to give the landholder the information that they need about the project, and then also the platform with which they can articulate what they know, so that from the beginning both sides are informed about both sides. With that fundamental starting point, you've got half a chance to find alignment. Without that fundamental starting point, no matter how good both sides of intentions are, it's like one of those movies where you can see the misalignment coming up, and you're like, no, don't do it. I can see why you can see it coming. So we've based our whole business on the right information to the right people at the right time in a two-way education process, so that both parties are able to articulate their perspective into their shared interest in the land.
Do you have any examples of when that has gone well? We've been able to move forward with renewables being built, but also landholders being right there, both having the shared vision.
Mm-hmm. In that sort of simplistic problem with a single landholder becomes more complicated when you have multiple landholders, and then you start to look at where the connection point, the crossover routes go for the wires run across, and so we did one project in New England with 6 landholders, and each one created their own land plan. We then matched those land plans up and shared that with the developer. And what ended up happening was you had a situation where one landholder's land plan had do not touch this area here, and the other one said do not touch this area here, and there was no point at which you could cross over. So what that did is it meant that from the very beginning, from the absolute outset, that was identified as a point of as a challenging point. And then what we were able to do, the developer then said, with this information, what we want to now go do is look at that ridge line and see which side of that ridge line is more stable to cut into, or to build a road alongside and under. It's going to have less erosion, etc. And with that information, they were able to go back to the landholders and say, look, we understand this is not there is no chance for a win-win. That's why I want to use it. We always look for win-wins. In this case, we went down, there was no win-win, but the developer was able to go forward and say, well, this is the technical reason why it's going to go on this side, and we acknowledge that landowner B, that's suboptimal for your outcome, and so that'll be reflected in the commercial land agreement to reflect that. And so that's an example of where having the information often leads to win-wins, because you find, like the orange, we both want the same orange. I want the peel, you want the pulp, and we can all have what we want. Sometimes you actually have these misalignments, but by having the right information early, you can then have informed logic-based discussions and responses, and everyone was happy with the outcome. Everyone felt heard, everyone felt acknowledged. I think so often a landholder sort of says, I could have lived with the outcome. It was the process that we got there, where I just wasn't heard. I wasn't listened to. And that's human nature. When I'm with my children, sometimes they say, "You're not hearing me." And I'm like, I'm being a developer. I think by providing all the parties with full information, the ability to put their perspective forward, there's always then an opportunity to find alignment, even where there's some challenges to overcome.
Yeah. And then we had a message from Carol in the chat, which said, "Are traditional landowners part of the conversation as well?"
So we ran a project last year with RELA. I'm not sure if you're aware of RELA. I'm not going to say what the acronym spells, because I always get it wrong, which is embarrassing, because we've just finished a contract with them, where we built out a lot of what I described before, the ability to produce that land plan and integrate it with the project into a technology platform that landholders and the advisors can use. And part of that was to have a stakeholder reference group across 7 different segments of the market: landholders, landholder advisors, developers, agricultural peak bodies, ag tech, government, and First Nations. And one of the things we learned from First Nations is that immediately you need to differentiate between a First Nations interest in the land, which is all land, and then secondly, where the land is actually traditionally owned, is part of the Indigenous estate, as opposed to being a stakeholder. They're actually the owner, and that represents over half of the country by size, obviously not by project areas, because a lot of that's in the middle of Australia, where there's a lot less density and infrastructure. And traditional owners have a very different governance structure to how you would actually establish a land plan. So if you're a farm owner, on the title is who owns the land, and whether it's a company or a trust or an individual, ultimately there's a contractual decision maker who's very clearly identified, who is authorized to decide on that story of the land. With traditional owners, the upfront challenge is actually understanding who holds authority, who is required to be engaged, who is required to what level of input do they have or control do they have within that process. And so we were working now with the 2 women who were on that stakeholder representative group around the creation of that governance infrastructure for traditional owners to produce the land plan as a very starting point, to ensure that it's authorized and fully informed. First Nations as a stakeholder on other projects is a slightly different category again. That's where there's input but not decision-making control.
Thanks, Michael. We had a question in the chat. How viable are biofuels? Maybe Rosie, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, maybe it's a good one that both of us probably have something to say about biofuels. So I think when you talk about biofuels, you really can't say like biofuels are good, biofuels are bad, because there's examples of both within it, no matter what metric that you care about, whether it's economics or land use or even climate emissions. You know, like a badly done biofuels are going to be worse for the climate than even, you know, just status quo fossil fuels. But there are heaps of pockets where they are super promising, like sustainable aviation fuel. It's the only real way that we're going to decarbonize aviation, you know, in the next 30, 40 years, maybe even longer than that, before we would ever see something like a hydrogen aeroplane. And yeah, I mean, except for short haul, we can do electric, but for anything longer, it's going to be biofuels. But the biggest challenge is scaling up the good methods, because yeah, I mean, there's a lot of difference in the different processes, and you know, some of the more promising ones is like using used chip oil to make biodiesel from that. It's just like, how many chips are we going to eat in the future that's going to, you know, scale up with our decarbonization efforts. So, you know, some of the promising ones are using like crop residues instead of like taking over land that you would use for growing food and then changing it into biofuels. There are ways that you can make biofuels from crop residues instead, so from waste, but those technologies aren't super mature yet, so they need some more development to scale up. That's probably my little summary, but keen to think what Michael thinks about the land use, if that is something you've thought about.
Interesting timing, and I enjoyed hearing your response, Rosie, and I'll probably reach out separately. So we actually got approached by a major gas infrastructure company that owns the actual infrastructure through which the gas flows, akin to the transmission lines, who told us that there's a government carrot and stick to shift from fossil fuels to renewable fuels pumping through their gas network. So they're not the developer, but they now have an incentive, both positive and negative, to shift what is being how the gas is being generated that goes into their pipelines. And they came to us because they in the biofuels industry, dynamics is, you actually, exactly as Rosie said, if you're actually just taking offtake from crop residue rather than growing it specifically, then one of the big challenges becomes scale. So you can go and build a plant, but you need to then go and have an offtake agreement with potentially, say, 40 landholders in the vicinity. And they felt that was quite overwhelming for them and for the developers, where they're used to a very different sort of dynamic with the way that gas typically worked, where it's on tenure rather than they're not the landowner choice, and there's certainly no neighbor agreements, etc. And so we're actually meeting with them on the 12th to dig in with them and the industry group behind them. And exactly as Rosie said, it's not proven yet to be economically viable, and there's a few inputs into that viability. There's the effectiveness with which you can translate that stock residue, that feedstock into fuel. And as Rosie said, a lot of that's unproven. If you speak to anyone who's founded a company that specializes in that, they'll tell you that they can now make it 25 times more efficient, and it's proven, but I think it's not yet actually proven. So that's one key thing. I think another key thing is government incentives, and actually, are they really going to support that through enabling ecosystems and R&D and potentially subsidies for early stage projects. And then the other question is, what are the landholders doing with that stock residue now? What's the value to them right now? After my meeting with that company, I went and spoke to one of our clients who has a 3 million hectare farm production business all the way through to organic foods that branded and sold in Coles and Woolies in the US. They're a huge food business. And I said, what do you do with your waste right now? And he said, mate, you're lucky I don't hang up this phone right now. We don't have waste. Everything we produce has a use and a value. Sometimes the value is less than the cost of going to market, so it's annoying. But everything has a value. There is no waste. And so it's not just about these projects making sense I'm a developer, I can build a plant at this cost and produce it at this cost. But when I actually look at what I can pay for the offtake, is that more than the current price you get for either reusing it yourself or selling it to a net demand farmer who uses it as fertilizer or other feedstock for their farming operations. And so from a landholder point of view, what we'll be doing over the next sort of 6 months of 2026 is building up a deeper understanding of the landholder economics of what they currently do with what they produce, and not just what the economic value, but what is the operational intensity required for them to use it in that way. And then on the developer side, for renewable gas, for biofuels, what might they be willing to pay, and what's operational support could they give to collection rather than needing to ship it themselves, et cetera. And finding out in the next 6 months if, with these technological developments and with this government support, is there in fact a viable market for from the landowner point of view before you can even think about whether it works at a project basis.
Yeah, thank you. And we also got a couple of questions sent in about virtual power plants. I guess to start, like, people were just asking, how do they work and how do regular people participate in them? Rosie, if you want.
I muted myself. Yeah, so virtual power plant it's kind of a funny name, but it's basically a way to get a bunch of distributed resources to act like a traditional power plant. I think the word virtual is not a great one because it's not like virtual energy, it's real energy. The electricity is exactly the same as it would be if it came from a coal power plant or a utility scale solar farm. But it's all to do with coordinating different distributed energy resources or consumer energy resources so that they are big enough to act just like a power plant would in the electricity market. So yeah, that means solar panels, it means batteries in people's homes. It also sometimes means things like being able to turn off your load. So, like the big electricity users in a home, like hot water. If you've got a pool, it'll be a pool pump, heating and cooling. Those are the main ones, I think. And so it might also be a way to tell people to use less of that when the electricity grid is really struggling. It might turn your thermostat down or up a few degrees depending on whether it's summer or winter. Those sort of things. And so, yeah, it's just a way to coordinate distributed energy in a more traditional way. I'm not personally the hugest proponent of it. I think that, like, in a place like Australia, we've got a very flexible electricity market, lots of price signals, lots of choice. People can choose, who to go with for their electricity provider. And so you can still get plenty of value from your solar panel and your battery, and the electricity grid also sees the value from those things. I think that it's more important in places like America where everything is very traditional, vertically integrated, which means that, like, the utility, it also owns the generation. It's responsible for planning how much generation they need, how much transmission, responsible for building it, also for selling to customers. And it's, like, basically all done just with flat electricity tariffs. And there it's like really hard to actually move into the new energy system with, rooftop solar and batteries, because there's just no way for the utility to get value from that, really. And there's no way to pass on the value that it provides to the system to the consumer. So there's just like no incentives all around to do anything. And a virtual power plant is a way that you can get those distributed resources to work well in that kind of system. I think that there is a place for them in Australia, and there are plenty of, I don't know every single electricity market in every single retailer in the country, but at least where I live in Canberra, there's a couple of different options that you can sign up your battery or, other stuff to a VPP. And usually how that works is they will pay you a certain amount per month, or it might be rolled up with a whole, like, electricity supply package. So you just pay a cheaper rate. But basically they control a certain proportion of your resources. Then you would have the ability to say at the start, like, what you wanted them to control or not. But at the end of the day, they're the one that says, oh, the electricity price is spiking. We need everybody's batteries to start discharging, and then they will turn those on and make that happen. Yeah, does that explain it well? I'm not sure if I actually did, but ask a follow-up question if I missed something important.
Yeah, no worries. I think there was another kind of follow-up that we got sent in just about, I guess, the general public's view of it. I think so. They said, I'm curious to know the general public feedback on virtual power plants. It seems like everyone is comfortable with solar and batteries, and that people are comfortable with the concept of solar exporting extra power to the grid, but only about 10% of people who have a battery are joining a virtual power plant. So is there a barrier there? Do you see do you think it's like an information gap, I guess?
I think it might change now because up until, what is it, like 6 months ago, the people that had home batteries were like real enthusiast, early adopter types.
Mm.
And up until, yeah, like 6 months or a year ago, the electricity market was quite volatile, and most people with a battery were joining something like Amber, or there's another one, Glowbird, maybe. There's a couple of providers that will let you have access to the wholesale prices, and it's a bit complicated, like more complicated than just being on a flat tariff. But basically, you are able to benefit like quite a lot financially from doing it yourself. Just being connected to the grid, and you either choose or you allow Amber to choose when you would export. You export when there's a price spike in the evening, and you import when prices are negative in the middle of the day, and you make quite a lot of money from that. But now there are so many batteries that have come online in the last year that we're starting to see far fewer electricity spikes, and so you can't actually make as much money from that. So I think in the past, like when you looked at the options, you can join a VPP or you can, DIY through Amber or something similar. It's just the VPP was not providing enough financial incentive to actually join them. And I still think today they're not providing very much. And so I think that's the barrier, is that, like the way that the electricity market was and still is to a large extent, it's like, there's always different players, a generator, distributor, retailer. They've all got to make a piece of money, and they all want, any improvement in efficiency. They want that money, that benefit to go to them. And now it's like actually homeowners are the ones that are holding this really valuable resource. And there isn't yet, I think, a fair distribution of value for what they're providing to the system in something like a VPP. So that needs to balance out a bit better. I think, yeah, like I said, like it'll naturally happen because the alternative isn't as lucrative now as it used to be, but also secondly because home batteries have gone super mainstream, and not everybody wants to be like looking at an app every day to make sure that they're not using electricity when it's really expensive. And you can go quite wrong if you adjust on the wholesale price if you accidentally leave your air conditioner and pool pump running while electricity was 10 times more expensive than it usually is, or 100 times more expensive, then you can really do badly. But yeah, so anyway, again, that was a very rambling answer, but I think that I contained an answer in all that talking.
Yeah. A follow-up from Gillian on the same topic. They said, we have just installed a battery and we have 42 kilowatts of the battery, which is plenty to share back. As I understand, you can sign over an amount with your VPP, but you need to know how much you actually use, or if you have to buy it back, it's really expensive. What's your take?
Yeah, it depends on the individual plan that you sign up to. So yeah, some of them will do what you say, where they will, have the right to take a certain amount, and you don't want to set that such that you would then need to buy it back when prices are really high. But other ones, are a bit more friendly to work with how your electricity consumption needs to work in your home. So, it might be used in like a dynamic kind of it's just looking at, what do you need to do across your home energy use? What's the electricity market doing? And, how can we best share this? I think that there's still some evolution to go on these exact mechanisms and also the business cases. And I'm personally like really super positive about this sort of innovation that's happening with companies in this space, because this is something that Australia is the first country to go through. We're further ahead on variable renewables than anybody else, and especially with this kind of very volatile electricity market prices. So we're the exact right place to solve these problems here, and then we should be able to, if we do it right, we should be able to export the technologies that we've developed to manage those well, the technologies and the businesses. Should be able to export those to the rest of the world. So I'm really hoping that we work it out here and are able to, commercialize it and make it a good export industry.
Yeah. We had a good question from Marty in the chat, which maybe I'll throw to Michael first. They said, environmentally, there's so many pros to moving to clean energy. However, there's a lot of environmental damage with new infrastructure, demand and improvements and transmission going into new areas that weren't affected by energy demand before. So as well as like social divisiveness in rural and regional areas. So how do you see clean energy? How do you see that clean energy can be a positive investment in the social and economic needs of rural and regional communities? Like how can that play out?
I think those statements are true, both true, as so often in the case is, the clear-cut good bad of the Hollywood movies doesn't exist in real life. I think there's a couple of things. One is just take the same approach as what I said earlier, where make sure you look at both perspectives, the agricultural and the energy perspective. And it sounds so simple, but if you are looking at things solely from the perspective of what is the most efficient way of moving electrons around the country, that will lead to a suboptimal outcome when it comes to the food aspect or environmental aspect. You must have that balance of perspectives. In terms of how that gets done, that's not our specific business model. We don't represent communities, we represent landholders. But there's probably two things I'd share. One is I think a really important stakeholder at a community level is the agricultural peak bodies operating in the area. Council is a crucial stakeholder and very important, and they'll look at the council objectives. But I think that to have the peak bodies representing the producers around that region is a crucial way of ensuring that the infrastructure doesn't disrupt the broader food production system, which then can have further follow-on effects on environmental impacts. And the second is when you talk about the division, that's spot on, and it's really actually probably the saddest part of the transition, the land transition. Particularly, there's probably 1,500 projects that are currently under development which won't get built. That's just the reality of renewable energy. Is not every project will get built. There's a lot of competing for the same grid access, and you've even had so much division, not just in what is built, but what will potentially be built. So you've got communities being divided on things that will never even happen, which is sad. And one of our clients said to us, he said, "Look, I really want to go ahead with this project, but when I come down the pub on a Friday night, I don't want to drink alone. So how can we do that? How can we address that?" And the message really is the same as to the developers coming to the landowner. It's about information. It's about communication, clear communication, giving the opportunity for others to clearly communicate their perspectives and make sure that their story is also told and considered and responded to. And from a landholder point of view, I think there's an opportunity to hold some accountability. Like right now, I think part of the challenge I said before, when a developer comes in, they say, "This is our vision, yes or no." The landholder is not only necessarily giving away control of their agricultural production system, but also their engagement with community. They're then essentially becoming disconnected from that project. And ultimately, if you're a landholder and you choose to sign an agreement with a developer, you're bringing that project into the community. You're allowing that to happen, and there needs to be some accountability for how that plays out. And so we encourage our clients to do two things. One is to include in the terms of reference when they're deciding which developer to go with, to include the community engagement plan as a key factor. So put weighting on it into their decision as to what to go into, and then from an actual land agreement perspective, to lock in their rights to participate and as part of a project control group when it comes to that community participation. So at least they can hand on heart, turn around to their community and say, this is what I'm doing to ensure that the benefit spreads around the community, and not just saying, sorry guys, no idea what's going on, I'm not involved in it, is not the right answer. And if done well, and you do bring in the right perspectives, and you do take an investment approach to opportunity rather than cost, it changes things. And the Queensland government, who is not necessarily promoting renewable energy, but to the extent that they're talking about that being a part of the mix and drivers going forward, is they're saying, hey, we want a decentralized population. We do not want to increase our ratio of city to regional people. And in order to achieve that, they're the only state which has more regional than city dwellers in the country, as I understand it. We need to have infrastructure, whether it's transmission lines or the things that can come around that, which is also decentralized. And that decentralized infrastructure must act as an uplifting, a generational uplift opportunity for those regions that host it. When it's painful is when the infrastructure gets rolled out without consideration of how it can be win-win and without the right economic sharing, then it's pure pain. If you actually flip your mindset into this is an opportunity, you take in the perspectives, the landholder takes accountability, the right peak bodies are involved, then it becomes an opportunity to decentralize access to various infrastructure in the country. But done badly, it's just railed over the top of communities.
Hey, Bree, can I ask a question? Because I can't find where I put my hand up and my iPad. But
Go for it.
I just wanted to just comment on that, Michael, because and I actually want to do a big shout out to the She Powers network that is on the call today, because we're doing this program called She Powers that Paola was talking about earlier on, and it is this community division and the heartache, and what you were saying is the saddest thing that you see is this is the big thing that the women in our She Powers network are experiencing, and Indrani mentioned it earlier in the chat, and it's this lack of communication between the developers and the landholders and the communities that we are finding through the feedback from the women in our She Powers network, and the gatherings that we're doing in August is really to understand from the women of the communities of what is needed for the communities to prosper and to thrive. And so, we will stay in touch with you on those findings when we do the gatherings later in the year. And everybody on the call, we would really love you to be part of all of this. It's a really important piece of work for us. So yes, so big shout out to our She Powers crew, and thank you for both of you for the incredible wisdom that you have brought to this conversation. Thank you. Oh, I did have one other thing. Sorry, Rosie. You know what you were saying earlier about solar. When I started 1 Million Women, we never talked about solar. It was like really foreign to us. It was like, oh, I don't understand it. Who's going to take it up, and who would do it for getting your electricity bill down? And it was so new. And then now, we're leading the world when it comes to rooftop solar. And I think it's something that Carol might have also mentioned in the chat. Where do we need to get to that we're in the same place now with batteries as we are? Like, how long will it take to get that same kind of, penetration that we have now with solar?
I don't have a specific number, but it's not going to take long at all. The momentum is thoroughly behind batteries, and it's got that advantage like solar that households can do it. So to the point where, like, if you talk to people who are modeling all of Australia's electricity system, most people are concerned that we're getting the balance between solar plus batteries and wind energy wrong. Like, it's going to be, I won't say the wrong system, but it's not going to be the cheapest way to make 100% renewable electricity grid, because we've gone too hard on solar, which is, it's a problem in the winter time when you have a lot less solar power, and if you did need to put in enough batteries, I mean, you could never put in enough batteries to cover the lack of solar in the winter time. But to the extent that you try, it'll be more expensive. But yeah, I'm not worried about batteries or solar. I am a bit worried about wind over the next 10 years. It's a real tricky mid-transition problem where it's like we know the end state of lots of solar and wind and batteries is better than the fossil fuel status quo. But there's this middle period where we've still got the coal power plants, but they need to close. That's really tricky time to actually build more wind, because prices are super low, because coal power plants can't turn off. Prices are going negative every single day, just about. In the middle of the day, it's really hard for a business case for a new wind farm, because wind energy is more expensive than solar. It's hard for it to make sense, and that's why we're not seeing a lot more being built now. But then once the coal power plants close, everyone is going to want to have wind farms, but won't just magically sprout up the second that you turn off a coal power plant. So it's like, if we just kind of go with the easy things, solar and batteries and EVs, I think will become easy too in another few years. What we'll do is just kind of stumble into having governments have to support coal power plants to stay open longer, because we don't have the wind in place yet. So I think that's the biggest challenge that we face in the immediate future, is how to make sure that our grid will be the right grid in 10 years' time, not just tomorrow, and then tomorrow we'll reassess, and then the day after tomorrow we'll reassess again. Like, it does need some sort of medium-term planning, as well as the day-to-day and the long-term. And there are some mechanisms that the government's trying to make that happen. None of them are working that well at the moment. I'm hopeful that they will keep on trying things until they make it work, because I don't have a really great solution. But we'll get there. But that's the hard part.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
another question sent in on this topic. It was kind of around offshore wind versus wind farms on land. Like, what's your take on the viability of either of those?
Yeah, well, offshore wind is a lot more expensive. It's at least twice as expensive as wind on land. So that's kind of your starting point. And then it just depends how much you value money versus having to not build as much transmission, not build as many wind farms in communities that, you never find a community where there is 100% support for a new project. Like, you try and obviously site them in places that aren't overwhelmingly hostile, but there's a lot of challenges. Michael's described so many of them with building onshore projects. But at the end of the day, do you want to pay twice as much for your electricity? Or, which is more painful, the landowner negotiations and in solving that problem, which is a very hard problem, or paying twice as much as you have to for some of your wind power, which is also, a painful thing. I'm an engineer, so I can't tell you how you should value different things like that. But Australia has so many great sites to build wind farms onshore that have a really globally very amazing wind resource as well. That we have a lot of high wind speed areas that are reasonably close to where people live. So it's not like you don't have to just say this is the next place in Australia to build a wind farm. It has to be here. You could choose between dozens of sites and find the right one. So I tend to think that we don't need offshore wind in Australia, and it's not worth the expense. But like I said, it's not. Yeah, I'm not skilled at the social stuff and the community stuff like Michael is. Yeah.
Amazing. There's one more question I want to squeeze in right at the end, just before we finish up, from Robin, who said, "Are there many examples in Australia of dual land use for agriculture for agriculture and solar projects such as solar sheep farming, and where they exist, are they working well?
Do you want me
Maybe-
to?
Yeah,
Go for
you-
it.
I'll go quickly, and then if you've got something to add, I'd say yes, there's heaps and heaps and heaps of solar farms with sheep. I would even go so far as to say that's mainstream. It's maybe the norm. I don't know if it's more than 50%, but it's incredibly common. But you can't, like, you don't just shove sheep on a wind farm and that's where they live 365 days a year and the grass stays the right length and the sheep are correctly fed. That's not how it works. So it's not any kind of silver bullet solution. But I will say that, like, the height of grass in a solar farm is probably like the number one job of a solar farm asset manager. It's the thing that's on their mind. If it's a fast grass growing season, everyone is obsessed with it because there's not enough sheep to go around. There's not enough, lawn mowing equipment to go around. And if you let the grass grow too high, then the safety regulator will shut you down until you get that under control. It's incredibly stressful. So yeah, it's a bit complex. But anyway, I'll hand to you, Michael, for more on that.
No, I think you answered it well, Rosie. And the only thing I'd say is that the coexistence with wind farms is also a really big factor, and probably less in mind because people assume that they can coexist. But actually, the complexity of a wind farm design, where the roads go, etc., can have major implications on the efficiency of how a farm runs and where the gates are, etc. So the sheep within the panels, as Rosie said, they don't just live there. There's how do you move things in between those, and that's where a lot of the complexity comes. Is not in whether they can be near each other. It's actually how you move how you have access and movement corridors, etc., that fit in with the project plan. So lots of great examples, but it's not as simple as the image of the sheep eating under the panel looks.
Well, yeah, I think that is all. But if there's any more questions, then we can. Yeah, I'm not sure if I missed any. Yeah, over to Nat. Do you want to close off?
Yeah, okay. Wow, what a sensational session. Thank you so much, Rosie and Michael. We all really appreciate it. And there's lots of us to take, lots of information for us to take away today. I just want to know, can everyone put on, or if you can put on your videos, great. If you can't, don't worry. But we'd love to take a photo just so we can put it up on our socials. It's really important for us to be able to show, the engagement. So yay, hello everyone. It's really nice to see you. Really nice. Hi. Yes, and our wonderful Eva will take a photo. We'll put it all into a little squares on an image and we'll pop that up on our socials. So thank you so much. And yeah, that's great. And I think that is it. So watch out for the information that comes to you on the gatherings. We have taken a recording of this session so you can have it. And that's it. Till the next time. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on today. Bree, huge thank you to you. Bree pulled this all together and we couldn't be more grateful for having you on the team. Thank you. And Eva, yeah, you too. Okay, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Rosie. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.